thumbs up in the back if this is good. Thank you. All right. Super excited that you all are here for this panel, working with asylum seeking households. We have it's our largest panel of the day, and we hope to have some good conversation after they're going to go through the initial presentation. So I'm going to hand the mic over to our panel so they can introduce themselves and just get right into it. So my understanding is that questions and discussion will be after going through the whole presentation. So document your questions and we'll get to them. All right, I'm going to hand over the mic.
Hi, I'm Jordan Cunning, she, her pronouns. I'm the legal director at Innovation Law Lab, which is an immigrant rights nonprofit based here in Portland. Thanks so much for having us. Jordan, if you missed the rest.
Hi, my name is Isaac Alley. I'm an attorney with the Public Defender's Office with the Samantha, and our unit is called Immigrant Defense Oregon. We do primarily removal defense, but we do other work associated with JOHS.
Did my job essentially. I'm Samantha Radcliffe and work at the Immigration Unit, IDO at Metro Public Defender. Oh, you have.
Hi, everyone. My name is TK Tapiwa Kapurura. I'm from Zimbabwe. I'm a policy advisor with the Multnomah County Immigrant Refugee Department.
Thank you, Marco Mejia, and I'm from the community. I'm from Ecuador originally, and I work with community organizing and migrant rights organizing here locally and nationally too.
Hi, everyone. My name is Raquel Barajas. I use she, her, ella pronouns, and I identify as Mexicana. And I'm also here representing as a community member and longtime immigration organizer.
Okay, just to give you a brief overview of what we're going to be covering today. This is a very critical area. Asylum seekers is a very critical area because to this county and to this city and metroplex, it's kind of a new concept because we've seen this happen in other jurisdictions and many other things have happened, amazing things, but to this place, it sounds like newish because we need to realign our thoughts and processes so we can do better. So this event is actually meant to highlight what's going on, educate the community, everybody involved, take questions and share where we stand. So on this panel, we have a group of experts. They're gonna share what they know and how the law works and how the system is working as we try to find solutions for housing for asylee and any other immigrants and refugees. So without further ado, I happen to be one of the first presenters for my slides. So I'm just gonna slide into that right now. Would we please have slide? Okay. The context here is since 2022, at least an average of 5 families estimate a week asylum seekers coming into Portland. The places where they're coming from differ. Some are coming from South America, Africa, Asia, and so forth. Being homeless for immigrant communities is not new. So that means every time we have some people coming in, they land in the hands of their fellow country members who have fairly been established here. So they can even be extended to like 3, 5, 10 people in one single room. It's unbelievable, but that's the reality behind the scenes. By the time you see them walking on the streets, that's the situation behind them. Taking on responsibility, grassroots organizations and mutual aid groups, that includes community-based organizations. They play a hand in trying to find out exactly who these people are, where are they coming from, how can we assist them? But the main essential things they are looking for, the starting point is food, then housing, then any other things will follow, but those are the main essential things. So referring asylees to homeless shelters has been challenging, even though they fall under the homeless definition. So there is also importance of intersectionality. There's race, there are cultures, many other things happen on the same side. And there is no time for like each particular item, but these things are flowing together as we move. May I have the second slide, please? Yes.
Thank you. We just wanted to expand a little bit more based on these parts of it too. similar to what TK said, is that there have been about 5 families coming into Portland specifically a week, and that is more. Those are not just, some of them are not even going through the system. And some of the reasons why we're seeing migrants coming to Portland, well, one part, let me just back up. Migrants are heading into the border and they're seeking for asylum at border entries. Those who end up in Texas, as you have heard probably in the headlines, the Texas governor has decided to quote unquote punish sanctuary cities. And by punishing sanctuary cities, he's been busing asylum seekers to Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, and Denver. And what we've been seeing is that families who go through Denver are told to come to Portland. And because of that, it's really, it's falling into the narrative of the red, not the red, but conservative, I guess, if people care about that kind of label, really punishing sanctuary cities and also the systems here. I think that the other part is that asylum seekers coming to Portland are newer. We are also seeing that they're hoping to find support in these cities. And because they're newer, many of them don't have family ties here necessarily. So they end up homeless. And Marco, I think I will pass this immigrant community.
Yeah, I'd like to amplify a little bit in terms of the traditional way of looking at migrants and the way that migrants have been criminalized as other communities, including the houseless community. There's different ways in how that ends up being in that way, right? But in the analysis that we've seen from the community is that we tend to break everything apart and say, oh, we're dealing with homeless communities here, we're dealing with migrants over here, we're dealing with other kinds of families here, with mental health over here, etc. And that has been a big problem, right? Because as TK already mentioned there, it has been very difficult to support migrant communities that are coming looking for asylum in this area. So that is not new. This is not new. It's been happening forever, right, in this country. So it is important to understand when we do it, as we mentioned, that there is an intersectionality in how we need to look at the situation with houseless communities. Migrants usually from many areas in the world, come from communal way of dealing, living, relating to each other. So that happens also locally here. And because that's happening in that way, there's not many homeless, if we want to say, migrants, because communities will support each other. They don't allow, that somebody's going to go to the streets. The problem is that the overcrowding of those homes, it's really very unhealthy, right? And they need the support also. So it's that difficulty in how we understand the system. So when we're talking about finding a house for people, it's also for potential, people that can end up in homelessness, and migrants are one of those groups. It is important, I mentioned we come from, also Raquel, from the side of the community and organizing and supporting, because as you know, we have the government, we have many of you are probably in the government, many are also in nonprofit organizations, but the migrants themselves, they don't represent anyone, they're not represented. They're just being the ones that are, okay, I'm the migrant and somebody else is dealing and deciding for myself, right? And that's kind of the reality, is because we are not thinking about giving a space for the migrants, right? For many reasons. And you can look at that, because migrants probably don't want even some of them to get involved with that, but others do, but they don't have the space. So it is important that we understand and see that we're dealing with human beings, with all of them, and that those human beings need to be treated as we like to be treated. So we need to be included, right? So we're talking about equity and inclusion and all of that stuff, but we're not doing that with our clients, as many of you call them, right? The clients. They're not clients for us. There's members of the community that have, going through this. So those views, we need to kind of look at them and see how those, like when we talk to clients, we're not talking to, oh, my community with the people from Ecuador or this person or from this or that. We just put into a more cold group called clients. So let's try to see if we can do an analysis and looking at people in a little bit of a different way. And I'm not blaming anyone here. The problem is the system. The system has defined how we're gonna deal with it, how we're gonna work with it, how we label migrants in different categories. And that's why migrants cannot be doing together, organizing, because they will be dealing with asylum seekers in one way, the government, other documented or refugees in a different way, undocumented, etc. So tend to divide us. So please include migrants, those that you work with, in some ways, to be part of the decision making, not just giving you information, but being part of the decision making. So I will end up there. This is very important to understand within the context when we're talking about houseless communities and migrants and asylum seekers, that there is more than what we usually have and what the system has been given us, and the tools and the language that the system gives us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marco. We're going to move on to the second slide. We'll talk about community-driven action for housing and for housing relief for immigrant refugees and asylee families. Government piloted at the Ramada motel for new arrivals to prevent a crisis. So what happened was we had a number of new arrivals who were just landing at the Portland airport and they did not have anywhere to go. You land there, you know nobody, so you just sit there. So the government decided through the Multnomah County to move people from the airport into the Ramada motel. And from there, the reason why they moved them from the airport was to try to avoid a crisis. It was a crisis, it was potentially gonna be a crisis because, like I said before, this had never happened before. We had heard about Texas, we had heard about California, but not Portland, Oregon. So families were moved from the airport to the Ramada for interim housing, and from Ramada, plans were made through the government and the Multnomah County. They signed an intergovernmental agreement where there was funding provided for some solutions for apartment housing. So some community-based organizations were contracted with to find housing for the new arrivals. About 300 families were eventually housed in a space of 6 months, but it was a lot of process going back and forth, screening, and making sure the families stay together in shared communities, cultures, and various other things. Of significance too here is the fact that those who were coming like from Asia, they had to be in a certain group so that the cultural-based organizations dealing with them had to know the language or to understand their cultures and their needs. The same thing happened to Afghans, to Africans, and many other nationalities. So new calls for permanent housing are still being called for as we speak, because when they were moved from the Ramada to the apartments, it was a 6-month deal. So after the 6 months, nobody knows what's gonna happen. And that's the same thing too we're gonna talk about, because it takes like 6 months to get a work permit. And given the culture barriers and many other factors, it's not easy to be yourself in 6 months. You still could risk being homeless after the 6 months because you're still trying to figure out what the situation is gonna be like. So there are new calls for the immigrant, refugee, and asylee families to be part of the Joint Office of Homeless Services, to be incorporated in there so that we can find a lasting solution to the housing crisis. So we move on to further explanation about immigrant, refugee, and asylum seeker challenges. I already spoke about the project that we did through the government, through the ODHS and the Multnomah County. So some of the challenges we found out was that asylum application requires several documents. One of our panelists will cover that in detail. So there will be need for like passport, I-94, and various other things. required for an asylum application to be lodged. So the main challenge with that would be lack of information or awareness on what to do among some of the families who are coming in, because not everybody would be privileged or favored with the system. Like in the case of those who went to the Ramada, they would consider them lucky because at least they are identified. Somebody can come to them with the resources and information to let them know, like, this is what you could do. So imagine if somebody was on a standalone, they don't know what to do, where to go, who to ask. Maybe they're just there, but they don't know what's coming. So among other things that my panelists will cover, sorry to preempt their topics, there would be the 1-year rule to file for asylum, then where to find legal resources would be a challenge, the means to access legal resources, system navigation issues, culture, language, many other challenges are some of the main basic things that affect a new person coming into America. So talking about lack of awareness or lack of understanding of how the process works, I'll give an example of how some of us would feel. I say some of us because I'm also an immigrant from Zimbabwe. We would say, like, for example, we are here now, all our problems are over, this is America, coming to America story. You're thinking, oh, okay, this is it. So once you feel like that, maybe you don't even see a need to keep my documents. I think maybe I'm here now, I ran away from my country. Why would they need my Zimbabwean ID in America? It doesn't work. So maybe it's time to trash it, but not knowing I'm actually going to compromise my application for asylum. Some would say we arrived yesterday, we just woke up as US citizens, we're thankful, innocently, but it doesn't work like that. Some would say, why keep identity documents of countries we fled from? No need. Some would say, will my documents from my remote country mean anything in the USA? No ways. Some would believe America will give me a fresh start, fresh set of identity documents anytime. I don't have to do anything. Government will take care of me, so would think. Government will assign someone to come to my house and explain everything and hold my hand and walk me through into the American system. It doesn't work like that. So when you come into the US as a new person, there are so many things you need to hold on to. My panelists will cover that. There are some documents that you cannot do without. Without those documents, you are risking your case. My panelists also explain, my fellow panelists will explain that. Then I'll turn it on over to Isaac.
Hello. Oh, hi. Okay. Access to justice. I'm sure many in the room know more about this than I do, but this will be kind of an anecdotal presentation about some of the challenges we have in connecting with clients and presenting their story in a legal environment. The first one is easy, I guess, is language. People come from all over the world. Of course, they speak different languages. There's a lot of confusion about this. So an example I put up here was about the client I had recently. They were from Guatemala, and they said they speak Spanish. And the conversation was very stilted because their Spanish speaking ability, frankly, was like a year or two deep. It was not very developed yet. So then I was like, well, when you grew up, what language did you speak in your house? And the person said Chu, which is, they would call it a dialect often in Guatemala, but it's actually a completely independent language that predates Spanish colonialism. But for whatever reason, it's been referred to as a dialect. So then you go to get a Chu interpreter, but then you find out there's actually dialects within Chu. So this particular person spoke the San Mateo variant, but the interpreter we got on the phone, and there's not a lot of these, spoke the San Sebastian variant. So it took a minute to kind of figure out exactly like what our client needs to have a voice, to tell their story, to express their needs, and just to kind of validate them as a human being. We got muddled through a bit with Spanish, but it became apparent that there was a real roadblock there. So I think voice is very important, letting them tell their story and express themselves. The second is empowerment. Most of our clients are fleeing disempowerment and extreme trauma. So we're hoping to reverse that by creating an environment where we say, hey, you're the boss here. We're here to assist you and help you get to your best life here in Oregon. I think that's the appropriate approach to take. These people are pretty amazing, frankly, to get from A to B and everything they had to survive to get here. So they're very resourceful, and they just needed some assistance and to kind of just be let known that, yeah, you do have value, you do have rights, you're a valuable person, you can do great things if you just help them actualize that. So I think it's important to establish that we're helping them, we're not their bosses. We're not telling them how to live. We're here to give them some choices. And then another thing that plays off that is that most people that are fleeing from these terrible environments don't come from an open community or democratic society. They come from oppressive environments. So often their response to authority figures who wear ties is just to agree to everything, which that sounds great, but it's not, because you're not getting accurate information. You're not finding out what's important to them, what they need. So it helps to like often talk a bit, but then reverse, say, hey, what do you think? Or how would you restate what I said? A way to get them to produce information originally from themselves rather than just nod to whatever you're saying. So that could lead to mistakes and confusion, and frankly, the wrong service is going to the wrong person. And then again, building off that trust, ideally, we'd like them to trust us. We're here to help them. You're dealing with some pretty thick, heavy issues. Oftentimes, they haven't told anyone about their trauma, kind of experienced the worst things in the world. So it takes a minute for people to trust you. Also, kind of building off that too, is that people that have suffered trauma often have what we kind of colloquially call trauma brain. Dates are jumbled, events are a bit blurry. It really helps to have a mental health practitioner in the mix. But again, working with us, if they trust us, it allows them to kind of like have less anxiety, their brain to settle, and you can revisit a conversation a few times to kind of get some clarity on what's happening. And then, yeah, effective communication. I just threw this one in here. With most of our clients, at least, email's like the worst way to stay in contact with somebody. Email's not a real thing for most people. In-person meetings are great if you can do them. After that, I get the most response to text messaging. It's like instant almost. Emails is like, maybe I'll hear back in a couple weeks, but maybe not. Everyone's different, of course, but that's some basic anecdotal considerations that I've experienced on trying to like bridge that gap with new clients.
And just on that note, just wanted to say something briefly about the languages. One of the questions that has helped us determine what exactly is going to be the sub-dialect, I guess you could call it, is asking what community are you from, like exactly from your country. So if you're ever referring people, that's a helpful question to ask, because that helps us more or less determine. But when you look at there's like tree branches of these dialects, it's humongous. It really is, like Isaac described. So I'm going to get into the definition of refugee, but that also applies to asylum seekers, and we'll get into the difference in the next slide. And so this is a legal definition that they have to fit into, or really I should say prove that they qualify for. So it's a person that's outside of his or her country of residence or nationality, unable or unwilling to return to that country. And here's a key thing, is based on either past persecution or well-rounded fear of future persecution. They don't have to have both. That's why the word "or" is in there. And the next part is incredibly key as well. It has to be on account of these 5 protected grounds. It's race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. The particular social group is the one that's the most vague, as you can probably tell. So we tend to get creative on that one. And all of these things could be, like if you go to an immigration law conference, each of these things could be like a session on its own. So there's a lot to it, but we just wanted to give you the big picture of it. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. So wanted to briefly touch on the difference between refugees and asylum seekers. So one of the big differences is that refugees come to the United States, or I mean, it could be other countries, but in this case, to the United States with status. They are arriving as refugees. And it's facilitated generally by the UNHCR, which stands for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. And so they're usually already outside of their country of origin, often in refugee camps. And then that whole process is facilitated abroad. So they have status when they arrive, and then usually they have assistance from agencies that help them resettle in the country, and they're immediately eligible for quite a few benefits. And then they're eligible to adjust status, which is a legal term for becoming a resident after a year of being a refugee. And then asylum seekers are applying for asylum within the United States. So they arrive with no status, or they might arrive with a visitor status or something different, right? But oftentimes, at least the clients we represent arrived undocumented, and they're asking the government to grant asylum. So you can apply defensively or affirmatively. We do a mix, but we do have a lot, like Isaac mentioned, we do a lot of removal defense, which is deportation defense. So you're defending against deportation in court. So you would be claiming that you're eligible for asylum in court. That would be defensive application of asylum. And then affirmative is when you're not in removal proceedings, or, I mean, this is beyond the scope. You might be, and there's certain cases where you would do that, but in general, you're not in removal proceedings and you're applying before USCIS, which stands for U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. And so court is adversarial, and USCIS not as much. There's still an asylum officer that's going to ask a lot of difficult questions, but it's not adversarial in the sense that you don't have an attorney on the other side from Department of Homeland Security trying to deport you, trying to argue that you don't qualify. So that's a big difference. They're also not eligible for many government benefits. So until asylum is granted, of course, but that's a big difference as well. And I wanted to briefly touch on the term asylee. So that's when they have asylum. So we distinguish between asylum seekers and asylees. And asylees can also become residents after a year of having asylee status. Would you add anything to anything?
So this is a handout we use. We have it in several languages to help folks kind of understand the legal terms that Sam was talking about a couple slides ago about how to prove your asylum case. So unfortunately, I think as it was clear as Sam was talking about the definition, the law is pretty narrow, right? So people who are fleeing for economic situations or people who are fleeing generalized violence aren't going to clearly fit into the box of being eligible for asylum. So that's why lawyers are creative. Anyone who has a fear of returning to their home country, we're going to try to make a good argument for them. And this is how we help folks kind of try to articulate what happened to them or what they're afraid of in a way that's going to check those legal boxes. So what happened to you, or what are you afraid is going to happen to you, right? Like, why are you afraid? People generally are not coming here for fun, right? People are leaving their homes, their communities, where they grew up, where they want to be. For a real reason. So what's that reason? What's that thing that you're afraid of? Who are you afraid of? Like, who did something to you, or who are you afraid is going to hurt you in the future? Why did they hurt you, or why do you think they're going to hurt you in particular as opposed to somebody else? Can the police or the government protect you? Sometimes people have been harmed by the police or the government, right? So it's really straightforward. But in a lot of other cases, they're harmed by non-government actors, and we have to show why they can't be protected by their government in their home country. And then relocation is another factor. So especially people from big countries, the government is always going to argue, well, you weren't safe in the town where you grew up, but why can't you go live in Puerto Vallarta? That's nice. I went there with my family, right? Great place to be. That's an issue that's going to come up. And so we ask people to think about why there's not anywhere in their country that they can live and feel safe. I know this panel is focused on asylum, but we wanted to talk a little bit about other types of immigration status, especially because there's a lot of overlap in these families, right? So you might have folks that have been here for a long time with a certain type of status whose then family members have recently arrived and are seeking asylum. So I think it's important to have the context for kind of the bigger picture of immigration law. So people can be undocumented. There's lots of ways to talk about this. I actually don't know if undocumented is like the currently appropriate word or not, but yeah, so these are folks that just lack immigration status is another way to say it. And either people who entered with a type of immigration status that has lapsed, or people who entered the country without permission, like in the first place, and have just stayed here. There are also a lot of temporary statuses. And I think we're seeing more of these under the Biden administration, as some of these are being granted and expanded. So DACA is for people who came to the country when they were children, brought here by their parents, and who've completed some type of education. There's been a lot of litigation about DACA, so unfortunately, there's not a lot of new people getting DACA, but there's definitely a population that's had DACA for a long time who still have that. There's also something called special immigrant juvenile status. This is a status for young people who've been abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or both parents. they're eligible to get a green card, but there's big backlogs. So people have this sort of deferred action status while they're waiting for CIGIS. Temporary protected status is another big one that I imagine you all might be running into if you're working with the immigrant populations. People from Venezuela who arrived in the country before, I think it was July 31st of last year, are all eligible for temporary protected status, as are folks from Haiti who arrived, I think it was November of 2022. So temporary protected status is a status designated by the president for countries to which there's so much turmoil, they say we don't want to remove people to there anymore, but people have to have been in the country on a certain date that's tied sort of to the date of the announcement. So it's a little bit unjust because people who are arriving here from Venezuela today, the country conditions have not improved, right? But they're not able to benefit from this protection, whereas people who arrived before a certain date are. TPS has a lot of benefits, but it is temporary, as the name states. So it has to be renewed every 18 months, and it's subject to the discretion of it being redesignated. So this was a big deal under the Trump administration, where they terminated a bunch of the TPS designations that have since been reinstated. But it's not a status that allows people to get a green card. You have to really stay on top of it and renew it every 18 months in a timely manner, or you might be out of status. So it's a good thing, but it's definitely not the best option for a lot of people if they have another more permanent option available. There are also U and T visas, which are for victims of crimes and victims of human trafficking. Lawful permanent residence, which is also colloquially known as like having a green card. People can get that through humanitarian, family, or employment pathways. And then U.S. citizenship is the most permanent type of immigration status that someone can have, which you can get by being born here, or after being a lawful permanent resident, you can apply for citizenship after 3 or 5 years.
I wasn't sure if the slide was mine or yours. Yeah, but obtaining immigration status is generally super challenging for humanitarian, and asylum would fall under that. Humanitarian type applications, it's, as you saw, a pretty narrow pathway. You have to really develop all these factors within a case to prove it. The denial rates are pretty high. In court, I mean, I don't know if either of you know the Portland denial rates right now, but they're like 60. And I mean, other courts are like 80, 90. It's pretty bad. There's also a 1-year filing deadline. So you have to file within 1 year of arriving to the US. And there are ways to overcome that. There are exceptions to the 1-year filing deadline. So please, if you come across someone who's been here 2 or 3 years, still refer them to us. We'll figure it out. But it is something you have to overcome and explain and fit into exceptions. So that's another challenge as well. The process is very long. These cases are pending for, I mean, here on the slides, you'll see 3 to 10 plus years. And I mean, I would say on average, we have what, 6, 7 years at least for pending cases. So it's a very, very long process. Cases will be open a long time. You might be waiting for an interview at USCIS for what feels like forever, for years. And then if it's not granted, you're referred to court, immigration court, and then years there. They're often, I mean, the immigration court's kind of like the Wild West, so things are just rescheduled, you know. It's a very, very long process. Some of the challenges for temporary protected statuses, temporary statuses and temporary protected statuses within that, like DACA as well, there's not a clear pathway, so there's no certainty. You just have that status. And essentially, it's kind of, for people that are on the webinar, I'm using air quotes, a promise that you won't be deported, but there's no real pathway to becoming a resident. And then for family-based only, not everyone has that pathway. It's not an option for everyone. Also, for example, if it's through a US citizen child, they have to wait until the child is over 21. And then depending on the circumstances of their immigration story, they might not really have it easy or even available anyways. The fees can be pretty expensive. I mean, we provide free legal services, but the fees to apply that you have to pay the government is a separate thing, obviously, and they're often expensive. They're often going up, and so that's a challenge as well. And then, yeah, there are certain family-based applications that are just not available if you don't have a lawful entry into the US. And there's hardship waivers and other things that, again, are sort of beyond the scope of this, but it's quite challenging sometimes depending on the circumstances of their immigration story and experience. Also, yeah, the federal government doesn't provide universal free representation or legal help. It's not like, you know, when we were the public defender's office, it's not like criminal defense where you have a right to an attorney. People don't have a right to an attorney. So they have to be in court on their own, and they do get detained sometimes. So they do get deprived of liberty and have no right to an attorney. So that is a challenge, of course, as well. And there's also a shortage of immigration attorneys. I was looking at statistics, and Oregon is one of the ones that have the most. There's like a list, but Oregon was on there, one of the most deprived of immigration attorney states. And I believe it was like below 30% of people have representation in court. So that's another challenge as well.
Okay, so I'm going to walk through like a timeline of a couple different types of asylum cases, and then we're also going to show you some of the documents that people might have that they may be showing you and asking you to explain to them, just for some context. So if you're requesting asylum defensively, so as Sam was talking about, that means in court, you can only request asylum in the United States. So that's why people are coming here to do it. You can't ask for asylum in your home country. So people have to be physically present here. And so they're entering the United States as the first step in their case. Some people have an interview at the border that's called a credible fear interview. If they don't pass this interview, they can be deported immediately, like within a matter of weeks. But a lot of people are not having that interview right now just because of capacity at the border. So some people are skipping that step and going straight to immigration court. As Sam mentioned, there's a 1-year filing deadline to file for asylum. This is really hard for a lot of people. People don't necessarily know that. We're going to talk more about what the form looks like, but it's in English. You don't necessarily get someone to help you with it. So if people are past that deadline, they should still apply because there might be exceptions. But presumptively, people are supposed to apply before 1 year in the United States. People are scheduled for a series of preliminary hearings called master calendars. The Portland Immigration Court is not too far from here. It's on 3rd. Some people get that hearing within a couple of weeks of arriving in the United States, depending on where they are and what the court's capacity is. And some people won't have that hearing for a couple of years. So that can be really confusing because people have this notice to appear in court. It might be before they've had the time to consult with an attorney or find legal assistance. And so that's a cause of a lot of stress for people who are unrepresented. Generally speaking, unless you've entered with parole, you're not eligible for work authorization, so permission to formally work in the United States, until 6 months after you've filed for asylum. So if you think about it, a lot of people aren't actually able to find help until close to that 1-year deadline, and then they have to wait an additional 5 months after that to apply to then receive it at the 6-month mark or later. So that can be like a 1.5 year delay for a lot of folks to have permission to work lawfully. That doesn't mean people aren't working. A lot of people are working without permission, but that puts them in jobs where they might not have the protections that they deserve or the pay that they should be receiving, right? Without that sort of formal above the table work permission. And then at one of those preliminary hearings, they'll be scheduled for their final hearing, which is called an individual or a merits hearing. Again, this can vary. So the Portland Immigration Court's had a lot of judge shuffling recently. So there's a new judge who shows up and he might schedule somebody for a hearing in 3 months, which is really stressful. But a lot of people are not scheduled for several years, which can be good or bad depending on your circumstances. We work with a lot of families who have strong claims. They have family members abroad. They really want to get that decision so they can kind of move forward with their life and bring their family members here. And they're really frustrated when that court date comes and it's 2026 or 2027 or farther out. So it can be a super long process. If people do not win, they can appeal within 30 days. And then those appeals can also take anywhere from a year to several years to be adjudicated. So it's a very long process.
Okay, so how do you know if someone's in court other than just asking them? Probably they have this piece of paper. This is called the notice to appear. It's the charging document. And once it's delivered to a court, the court then has jurisdiction to decide on that case. Now, some things to keep in mind here, and I did a kind of a terrible job highlighting, but you'll see at number 3 that I underlined a date. That's the date that the government thinks this person entered the US. So if you're trying to calculate that 1-year filing deadline, that's probably a pretty safe bet. And then another thing to keep in mind is at the bottom, it's supposed to list the place of the hearing, the time, and the date. Now, you'll notice here that those things are not on this form. This is subject to seemingly never-ending litigation. But if you see that, definitely refer them to an attorney sooner than later because they might have a claim in court to possibly get their case dismissed. But long story short, the NTA is the document that best jurisdiction with the court. And then to the next slide. Oops, maybe back one. Yep. There it is. Okay, and this is the hearing notice. Again, just trying to show you what the piece of paper looks like. It'll have their name on it in the top left, along with an A number. That's the, I guess, alien number. It's an ugly term, but it's sort of like a social security number for anyone who's not a citizen. And then you'll have the type of hearing. A master hearing is like an administrative hearing, so it's not a final hearing. And then an individual hearing is the final hearing where the judge will make a decision about a legal application or defense. So that's where they would say, yes, you win, or no, you don't, generally. And then you'll have, again, the location and the date and the time. And then just a quick note, if you, on the slide at the bottom left, you'll see a link. You can type the A number into that link and it'll tell you when their next hearing is and what type of hearing it is. So sometimes clients don't know when their next hearing is. Again, maybe they went to court, nominally as a Spanish speaker, but they actually speak an indigenous language. They might not have actually comprehended what's going on. They might seem confused. If they have the A number, which is on all the forms, you can plug it in that website and it'll tell you, oh, your next hearing is on X date and it's this type of hearing.
Okay, so I'm just going to talk quickly about the affirmative process. So again, this is outside of court, and that's either because people entered the country without being apprehended, or they overstayed like a visa or something, or some people who entered the country and received that NTA that Isaac talked about 2 slides ago, the government just never files it. So that's really confusing for people because their family members have court dates. They think a court is where they need to be, but they actually will have an affirmative pathway until, unless and until that NTA is filed. So yeah, so folks, again, have to be physically present in the United States. They still have that 1-year deadline if they're applying affirmatively. And then they have the same timeline for work permit eligibility of 150 days after you can file to then receive it 180 days later. And then the slide's kind of empty because you just wait for your interview and it takes forever. So I don't know what you guys are seeing, but our office, like we're seeing interviews scheduled from like 2015, 2016. Portland cases go to Seattle, I think, for interviews, and they just don't take a lot of cases from Portland. So, or San Francisco, I guess San Francisco office, they do circuit. Yeah. Oh, they're opening. Yeah. They're opening an office in Seattle. So this could speed up. But again, for folks who are really anxious to get their claims heard and try to reunify with family members, the wait time for affirmative cases is really super challenging. So if people win at that interview and are granted asylum, that's great. They continue on that pathway. If people lose, they don't actually get denied. They get referred to court for a judge to then hear that application again. So they get sort of a second shot, but it does sort of prolong the process by a long time.
So this is an example of the form called I-589. I mean, every immigration form has like I, or some of their G, whatever, and then numbers. But this is the asylum application. And so this is the first page. It's actually 12 pages long. But this is just so you have an idea of what it looks like. So one thing to note is that the edition date is at the bottom. There's something at the top that says when it expires. That is not relevant. I know it's so counterintuitive. I think this is all made by design, so it's difficult for people. But go by edition date, and often you'll see updates within uscis.gov, and they'll say, we're not accepting this date anymore. So then you have to switch to the next edition date, or your entire application will be sent back. So that's important to note. There's 3 legal defenses, and each of them have, different legal information within them that you'd have to prove, but they're similar in terms of the fear and all of that. So, and again, sort of beyond the scope of this, so I don't want to get into it too much. But there's asylum, there's withholding of removal, and then there's convention against torture. And so you want to be aware that those 3 exist, and you want to check the box. I'm going to see how it's worded here. Yeah, about CAT. yeah, you want to make sure those boxes are checked. I mean, of course, please refer them to us. You know, I'm not saying exactly how to fill it out, but I'm just saying in general, you want to make sure those boxes are checked. And if you want to look up the latest version, go to uscis.gov. And actually for anything related to forms, that's where you're going to find all of them. You'll find the filing fees, you find the edition date, where to file, all that information should be in there. So uscis.gov is a good website to have as a general practice if you ever want to check anything related to immigration forms.
So in addition to the form, it's generally best practice to have some supporting evidence other than your testimony. So that can include identity documents, personal statements, or witness testimony, psychological evaluations, medical evaluations, and then expert information or news reports from the home country as well. I talked a little about this with the asylum clock, but so waiting that 180 days, this is often what people are really most concerned about when they come and talk to a lawyer for the first time. So want to get people that application filed and we want to get people to that 150 days. But unfortunately, there's something called a clock that an applicant can stop sort of inadvertently. And that includes if you go to court and you ask for more time to find an attorney and you don't already have the 150 or 180 days on your application. There's other ways the clock can stop, but just for some context, there are people who may have filed their asylum application longer than 6 months ago who are not going to be eligible for a work permit based on their asylum application because they've done something to stop the accrual on that clock. So that's something we really try to help educate people about and help people sort of prevent that. If their priority is getting work authorization. One other caveat about work authorization that's not on the slide, people who've entered with parole can be eligible to get a work authorization immediately. That work permit costs, I think, about $465 though, whereas the asylum work permit is free. So that's going to be a meaningful difference for some folks in terms of their ability to get it. There were also some questions about benefits eligibility. So I am not a benefits expert, but I do know something about it because we get a lot of questions. So just kind of some basic information about that. So many federal and state benefits are unavailable to people before they have like a more permanent immigration status. So someone who shows up and is seeking asylum here, generally they're not going to be eligible for food stamps or cash assistance or some of the other things like that. However, what we always tell people is please do not be afraid of seeking benefits for which you are eligible. There's something called public charge, which is a analysis of when people have used certain types of benefits, they can be ineligible for certain types of mostly family-based and maybe employment-based immigration. But public charge is not applied to asylum seekers. So receiving benefits for which you're eligible, I think generally will not affect you negatively, but especially if you're seeking asylum or some of these other humanitarian forms of relief, people should absolutely apply for any benefit for which they are eligible. People shouldn't lie. So I always say, don't say you're a US citizen to get that benefit. That will cause problems. But if you do know you're eligible, people should not be afraid to seek benefits. Additionally, there's a special law that creates benefit eligibility for people from Haiti and Cuba. It's like many decades old, but still applies. And then people who entered on parole from Nicaragua and Venezuela also have some benefits eligibility during the period that their parole is valid, which is usually 1 or 2 years. U.S. citizen children also have their own eligibility. So if someone has a child here, they're a U.S. citizen, hooray, and that U.S. citizen is eligible for benefits, and that might benefit the whole household. So people should definitely not be afraid of seeking any benefits that folks in their household are eligible for. And then the real experts on this are Oregon Law Center, who's not here, but they have a public benefits hotline. So people can call that Monday through Thursday. The number's up there. You can also find it on their website. And that's a really great resource for sort of more specific questions. Okay, I'm gonna talk a little bit about available services, and I have a few slides, so I will try to go fast because I've been talking a lot. But people need legal help. So I think, hopefully some of the takeaways, like immigration law is really complicated. People, I think, need lawyers or at least education to navigate the system because it's meant to disadvantage people so that they fail as they try to go through it. And so luckily, Oregon has a program that provides free legal assistance to immigrants who can't afford legal help. So it's part of a coalition called Oregon Worker Relief. which administers not only Equity Corps, which is the Universal Legal Representation Program, but also some cash assistance programs for people who are ineligible for receiving other benefits because of their immigration status. And you can do the next one. And we help all types of people. So the program was created by statute. And so by statute, it prioritizes people who are most at risk of removal. So it's a lot of deportation cases. But the program also helps people who are in an affirmative posture. So who are seeking asylum affirmatively, who are eligible for immigration status through family members, who want to become US citizens, all types of folks who are either at risk of removal or who are suffering some sort of civic exclusion based on their immigration status. So the program is structured in an attempt to avoid what we call the referral shuffle. So I don't know if this is true also in other service areas, but a lot of times folks have to seek services from multiple access points, right? And that can be really traumatizing. It can be really discouraging, especially in immigration. Like sometimes the intake questions are like, hey, what's the worst thing that's ever happened to you? That's what I need to know to figure out what kind of relief you're eligible for, right? So to repeat that story multiple times to multiple different people is not trauma informed. It's not effective. It's not a good way to do it. So this is how things kind of often go, where people are shuffled around from agency to agency. There's also many different agencies involved in the immigration process that people are sort of shuffled between. And so the way the equity program was set up attempts to center the folks who are affected. You can go to the next slide. Yeah. And so having a centralized access point, the information of which I'll share, where people access the program through community-based organizations and community navigators. So the idea is that folks are able to access services through an organization where they feel comfortable, where folks are from their community, or folks speak their language. Maybe it's somewhere they're already accessing other types of services or where they've already sought assistance. And through that access point, folks are then looped into a system where they get to choose where they want to access services. So there's many different providers. MPD is one of the fabulous ones, among many fabulous ones. And people can pick where they're most comfortable receiving services on the timeline that works for them. I'm going to pass to TK.
I'm also going to talk again about who is eligible. There are Oregon residents, they are eligible. Then household income of less than 200% of the federal poverty guidelines would be eligible. Then at risk of deportation or civil exclusion due to immigration status would be an issue as well. So you would be eligible as well. So I'm going to talk slightly about how to access services. You call the toll-free number as outlined on the chart, Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Applicants are prioritized based on agency of need and wait times. Will be navigated into ECO and receive legal services throughout the life of their immigration case.
Sorry, there's a slide that I added that's not in here. Might have been slightly too late or something. But I just wanted to briefly say that our Immigrant Defense Oregon IDO team is within the Community Law Division of Metropolitan Public Defender. And we do have referrals as well. I mean, we're part of the ECHO program, but we also, under our JOHS grant, we do immigration services. And there's a referral link. And I don't know if you all have access to all the materials for every session, but you would still find it under the barriers to housing session. So we're like an office within an office within an office. But so we are part of Metropolitan Public Defender. And then within that organization, there's a division called Community Law, which is like the civil arm of the public defenders. And then we're within that. And the name of our immigration unit is Immigrant Defense Oregon, or IDO. Thank you. Oh, sorry, starting July 1st, I wanted to make a note of that. That's when we will take referrals again for this, sorry.
Okay. This is the very last one, right? Fine. Yeah, we're actually now open for questions.
So we're gonna come to y'all with the mic so that we can record the questions for the webinar.
This is a very specific question, so I hope it's okay. I have two friends who do not have documents, who are being told by the shelter that they're going to help them with their immigration status, which I highly doubt is going to work out well. And I'm wondering if there's a way to figure out or to connect them with someone who can look over what they're doing and make sure it's not putting them in greater risk.
Yeah, so people who are not immigration lawyers or accredited reps should not be filling out forms for people. It's unlawful practice of law, and it's really scary just because the forms are not intuitive. And like you said, like things can get really messed up. So I know a lot of people want to help, and it can feel like there's not legal help out there. Like I just need to do this for someone, but I really highly advise against it. And so, yeah, you can call Equity Corps and you can get them enrolled, or you can have them call. Yeah, it's that 1-800 number. There's also a website, Equity Corps of Oregon. If you Google it, it'll show up, because there's also pathways in through community-based organizations if that's easier for people. But otherwise, people can always call the call center. So that's what I would suggest.
Hi, I was wondering about what are questions we can ask to kind of get an idea of what someone's immigration status is, if it's relevant, for connecting to other supportive services like SNAP or other benefits.
It is on. Sorry, keep turning it on and off. So I would actually suggest just sending them to the public benefits hotline, because there's so much that we ask. Like when we do an intake, there's so many questions to figure out what status they may have. Sometimes people are actually confused about their status. So you could still ask, do you know what your status is? Do you have any documents from immigration that you've ever received? You could ask, have you had contact with immigration officials? Did you cross the border? I mean, there's so many questions, but I think that probably best would be to either refer them to an immigration attorney or the public benefits hotline if it's specific to SNAP or anything else.
Perfect, thank you.
Oh, and in terms of figuring out your status too, just to build off Jordan, you should always talk to a legal professional. Even if that person doesn't service the case, they should be able to talk to the person and pretty clearly identify what their situation is and what their options are. And I think that's the first step in empowerment, is like give people like reliable information so they can make choices for themselves. But until that happens, they just hear things, and I think it's impossible. So yeah, definitely. There's all sorts of free places that do this. We do it. There's clinics. We all work together too. It's not that big of a community. So yeah, please reach out.
I had two questions. One really quickly, you mentioned parolee in the context of people from other countries. So I'm just curious about what a parolee is, if it's different than what you would normally think of that. And then the second one, to qualify for ECO, there's mentioning that if you're possible subject to civic exclusion, you would qualify. And I'm just curious if we could get more of an explanation of what is civic exclusion.
It's all good. What is parole? It's a great question. So when you enter at the border, they're either going, and you're processed by an immigration officer at the border. Some people enter the country with a document called parole, and it's like an authorization to be here for either usually a period of 1 or 2 years. Sometimes it's a shorter period of time. People in the exact same posture who present the same case and who show up at the same place might not get parole. So it's very random who gets it and who doesn't. It causes a lot of concern to people when they don't have it and someone else does, but it really doesn't make a super big difference other than that possible work permit eligibility. I think the most relevant way we're seeing it more recently is they announced, I think it was last summer, Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans have a specific parole program. So people can apply from outside the United States. They have a sponsor here in the United States who agrees to financially support them. And then they buy their own ticket and they show up and they're granted parole for a period of 2 years in the United States. That parole will expire and people will be out of immigration status. So most people are going to be in a posture where they still need to seek asylum, but they're not in front of the immigration court, and they do have this sort of 2-year authorization to be here, have a work permit, and kind of figure out what they want to do next. There's a document called an I-94. That's what people are going to have when they have parole. And the second question was about civic exclusion. So civic exclusion would be like, I can't vote because I'm not a US citizen, right? Or I can't get access to this benefit because I don't have my green card and I want to change my status. So it's basically encompassing people who, because of immigration status, are limited from full participation in our society in some way.
First of all, thank you all so much for the work that you do. My name is Erica. I'm from Care, Oregon. And I wanted to ask for some more information. So I think it was when the Ramada was first secured, I went on Wednesdays to the resource pop-ups for like 6 months. I know as of like last September, there was a large scramble because folks didn't know where the funding was going to come from. The funding to support folks at the Ramada was supposed to end in December. Somehow some monies came through. I know there was a lot of grassroots efforts, community organizations coming together, secured an apartment building for some folks, and you spoke to like the 6 months timeline. I feel like we're getting to that place. So do you have any, is the Ramada still a thing? Are the resource pop-ups still a thing? And I feel like there's like 2 months before whatever funding there was runs out again, or I just don't have the information. So can you just give an update on like what's currently happening for folks?
Oh, thank you. The Ramada thing is still on, but I have to explain that the resources are limited. The initial project had limited funding, and they're still trying to explore if there are any other ways to explore into more resources because the populations, the new arrivals keep coming, and this is a humanitarian crisis. While we cannot promise, or while the government cannot promise anything, they are looking into it to see if there can be any ways or any means to sustain those already in the 6-month lease, and also to see if they can accommodate any other coming ones. But there is no promises yet because they're still working on the resources.
Just to add to that point too, there are 2 program offers right now in Multnomah County that I cannot remember the numbers at the top of my head, but if you look at program offers around shelter for asylum seekers through the Multnomah County website, those are right now on the dock. And this week you can write a testimony through the you're gonna have to Google because I can't remember any of these on the top of my head, but Multnomah County has written testimony just this week. I think it's either Wednesday or Thursday. That's today. Yes, that's today. Write a testimony saying that you want to support this, to continue it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the Ramada is going to stay. It just means that it opens funds to provide shelter for asylum seekers or asylees.
And also a little extra information is that you mentioned the community organizing. So that's where I come in, and other groups and organizations that have been working, kind of replacing the role of the government, which is really bad, right? That we've been looking for, and some people even giving space in their own homes to asylum seekers. So it's been a very difficult, traumatizing process because since months ago, it wasn't gonna end the funding, and that's why the people had to get more organized and actually demanding coming to the meetings of the county. And it's difficult to understand, who's responsible. Is the county, is the state, is the city, who is there? And there's no clarity for the people because there's no clarity that's given by these institutions to the people. So it's being month to month. So because the commissioner in the city decided to get some funding somewhere, they extended 1 month or 5 days first, and then the county another month. And then I understand now that there's funding through June. Is that right? But that's it. And I think probably that's where it's going to end. But people have been living this situation that they know that Monday they will be in the streets with no options where to go. That's why it comes to the discussion about the housing and the homeless or houseless, this collaborative, and how they also can support that. A lot of people are going to be out at the end of June.
just a little bit. So I'm really glad that everyone is here learning about this because it's really important, especially if these program offers end up passing, they will end up in the Joint Office of Homeless Services. So it's good for everyone to be ready and get themselves educated around this.
So I have a very specific question about the process of asylum. What determines where the master interview is going to take place? I get confused in that. A lot of my clients have them in different places in the United States. Where is that determination made when they enter the border?
That's a great question because it's a big problem because people have these hearings across the country and they're like, how am I supposed to get there? They set the hearing where people tell people that they're going. So if you cross the border, you don't know where you're going, they might say, well, go to New York, there's a shelter there. And they'll say, sure. And then people go to New York and there's not anywhere for them to be. And then they come to Portland and you have to file a motion to actually change the location of your
Which
hearing.
then stops the process. That's that ticking clock that stops the clock.
They actually just changed that. So now it doesn't stop the clock anymore, which is great news. But that's
when did they change that?
like a few months ago, like very recently.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So it's set based on where people say that they're going and the address that they give. And then if people are here, they need to file a motion to change that. And so that's something that legal services can help them with.
Hello, my question is for those individuals that come across like us with providers, if they need translation services, is it possible for providers to translate documents for them, like birth certificates, any paperwork that they bring either from their country of origin into like the English language with like a certified portion at the bottom of their sheets that says, I, such person, translated this information for them and date it and sign it? Is that valid?
Yes, for our clients, we do help with translation materials and getting it certified in such a way that the court will accept it. There can be a little bit of a chase to find supports, particularly for like less common languages and things like that, but we try to find a way.
I was just going to add that we have Spanish in-house, and I would say most immigration firms or nonprofits will, but other languages, generally, you're outsourcing for the most part.
Are there any other questions? Sorry, one more question, just to follow up on that question, because I would like a clarification. So like me as a caseworker, if I speak another language and I'm fluent, you're saying that I can translate that document without having having any special training?
Yes, you can, especially for immigration purposes. There's like this block of like template language, and you just have to sign it saying that you're fluent in language A and B and that the following is an accurate translation to the best of your abilities.
Okay. And does it have to be notarized?
Generally, no. You just need to sign it and date it. You could notarize it. It looks nice. It's like cool stamp and stuff, but you don't really need it, no.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
All right, well, if we have, one more question in the back, I think two.
Sorry about that. As somebody that we work with folks that are in our shelter, we have folks we've been working on asylum cases and things. How do we help people out? Because the legal fees are so ridiculous, and that makes it so it pauses like what we're doing for folks. So do you have any advice or any tips on what we should do to help them moving forward? Because a lot of it we feel like we're like stuck with, because the fees are the things that are stopping us from helping people go any further.
Yeah, so please refer them to us. So Oregon has dollars for people who can't afford legal representation. We also work with a private bar. So the nonprofit attorneys in Oregon are awesome, but there aren't enough to serve the need. And so we have partnerships with a private bar where the state pays the private bar to take cases. So if someone's working with a private attorney and they can't pay the fees anymore, contact us because that attorney might be in our program, and then the state can basically take over the payments to pay them for their removal defense. So ask for help. People should not be having to bankrupt themselves to get legal services.
And I was just gonna add, like, us and most nonprofits, legal services, so legal fees are free. I mean, there's no legal fee for our services, but just wanted to distinguish, because I mentioned it earlier, the filing fees is an issue as well. And for that, I mean, really funding. I don't know, maybe you meant just legal fees, but I just wanted to mention that. And under certain grants, we might have client funds. I know ECHOS has for certain things too. But yeah, essentially advocating for funding for that is important.
And just a final point, which might be too much in the weeds, but you can sometimes ask for a fee waiver. It's a form you fill out. It's kind of a pain in the butt. It doesn't always work, but we do a lot of those as well. So again, to Jordan's point, I would just try to hook them up with one of us, and then we can walk them through the process because we do it every day.
Mine is a second point, but ditto what everyone has said. So I think I just wanted to go back to the testimony thing. And yes, it is today from 6 to 8 p.m. And you can go to the website moltco.us/budget-feedback. And you can write your testimony up until 6 p.m. Or you can testify virtually. They do. They actually read it, and they also make sure that they count the people who come in to testify on that.
Have an impact. That's good.
No, there is nothing that asks for that. It just asks for your name, email address, and submit written comment, and then it would be the Joint Office of Homeless Services. Yeah.
Okay, I just have one question about the Ramada Inn. I was wondering, do you guys have any other resources of where we can try to make sure that the families stay together for long-term until their court date? Or is the Ramada Inn the only option, or other shelters? Do you guys have any other resources?
So there's no resources really. And the resources that have been coming up, as I mentioned, is month to month, because all the testimonies and the work that has been doing actually the asylum seekers with the community organizing that, they have been pushing and putting a little extra money, but there's no more money for anything. Actually, what's happening is that this collaborative also that's happening, some organizations like Emerge and others, and actually individuals that have been giving up their homes, for people to come and stay there temporarily, are the ones that are trying to find people in the community or congregations to open up their homes and offer it for free, pretty much. So there's no funding. The funding is very limited. Even what we're talking about today, it's a very limited budget that will be, so there's no funding. Yep.
Well, first, let's thank the panel so much. Jordan, Isaac, Sam, TK, Marco, Raquel, thank you. In terms of the rest of the day, there's an informal wrap-up session starting at 2:30 in the ballroom where we've spent much of our day. So